Hello and welcome again to another video from elttraining.com. I'm Jo Gakonga and this is the next in a series on classroom management. I've called it Setting Up and Running Activities 2 because I'd planned this video to be just one, but I don't know if you remember, last month it sort of expanded. So part one of this was interaction patterns and arranging groups. And now we're going to be looking at part two, which is starting up activities and monitoring learners. So let's get started. Starting an activity, when you're starting something, it's really important to be prepared. Make sure you've really thought about what you're going to do, how you're going to set it up. It's worth really planning this well. And it's also worth thinking about the shape of an activity. I think all activities have to have a beginning, a middle and an end. So you need to start something off properly, and you need to have something in the middle, some stuff clearly, and you need to finish it off. If the end of the activity is, well, that's the last question, let's go on to the next thing, there's nothing satisfying about that end product. So you need to think about the beginning and the end, I think, to make it feel as if it's an organised, complete whole for learners. So the first thing is to get their attention. Make sure that they're listening to you. And then you need to generate interest. So I think there's something of the selling it to them, really, with activity. If you're keen on something, if you're excited about something, if you're passionate, that will be contagious and they're likely to be engaged. So I think it's really worth thinking about making sure that you're interested. And if it's something that's really not interesting, you might want to think about whether you want to do this with your class or not. Do interesting things with them and make sure that you feel that they're interesting and that you transmit that excitement to them. Visuals are a great way to do this. So for example, if your lesson's about journeys, I mean, you could say, tell me about your journey to school, but that's boring. Something like this, who are they, where are they going, why, that's interesting. And it's very easy to find good pictures. I mean, there's lots on Google Images, but for copyright reasons, a couple of sites that I'd really recommend are morguefile.com, which is where I got this picture from, and pixabay.com that I've just discovered, which also has a lot of copyright-free pictures. So those are both great sites for getting interesting pictures. As well as pictures, interesting questions are good, and interesting personalised questions. So what's the thing that we all really like to talk about most? Ourselves. What's the thing we know about best and it's easiest to talk about? Ourselves. So, this is a useful thing. This visual might be about food, for example. So you could say, what's your favourite food? That's an okay question, but a more interesting, personalised question would be, what was the best meal you've ever eaten? For example, that's a bit more specific and it really will generate a lot more interest. So think about how you can tweak things to make them more interesting. You need to anticipate the problems that they will have. So not things like they won't understand my instructions, but what kind of difficulties are they going to have in doing this task? What kind of language will they need to do the task? Perhaps they'll need particular vocabulary or particular functional language of apologising or explaining. Perhaps they'll need particular grammatical structures. So think about what they're going to need. With the example we looked at before, obviously they're going to need lexis for describing food. So this might be fruit, vegetables, meat. One of the first classes I ever taught in Taiwan a long time ago, I went in and I said to the first learner, oh, what's your favourite food? The question I've just told you not to say. What's your favourite food? And they said cabbage. And the next one said, what's your favourite food? And they said cabbage. And I asked the next one, and I said, what's your favourite food? And they said, cabbage. And at this point I thought, well, cabbage is nice enough, but really? So I asked them, what words do you know for food? And they said, cabbage. So it's worth making sure that they've got the lexis that they need to do the task. It might not just be, cabbage, meat, vegetable kind of vocabulary. How about words like boiled and fried and roast? So if you're going to describe food, think about what words you're going to need to do that. It might be functional language like, I really love, I can't stand, I don't like this very much. That sort of thing might be necessary for this task. It might be grammatical structures, simple present question forms, negating, do you like, I don't like. So think about what they're going to need. A good way of finding this out is to do the task yourself. Actually do it out loud if it's a speaking task, and see what language you need to do this. If you're doing a receptive skills lesson, it's worth thinking about, will the reading or the listening be difficult? And if it is, what can I do to ease the load? What can I do to help them, to give them an introduction, to help them to predict the content of the text, for example? So thinking about all these things, being prepared and anticipating the problems. You need to then give clear instructions. We've talked about this before, the whole video about this, so I won't go into it now, but I'll just reiterate that a demonstration is worth a lot of explanation. Just show them what to do. So you've started up your activity and your learners are working. The next thing to think about is monitoring. What are you going to be doing while they're working? Now, in your classroom, if this is your class and there's you, then there are different ways that you can monitor, different places that you can monitor. This might be one place, so to come in front of learners and listen to them in groups or whatever as you're going around. It's worth thinking about that if you're the learner sitting down and your teacher comes and stands over you like this, that there's something a little bit potentially intimidating about this. So it's worth maybe crouching down and getting at eye level with your learners. Try it with your learners and see what the difference is. You might be quite surprised at what a difference it does make to the relationship that you have with them. The other thing to think about is eye contact. If you make eye contact with someone, then they will engage with you. That's normal human interaction patterns. But you might not want to be engaging with the learners. They might be working in pairs, and you might just want to listen in to what they're doing. In this case, it's probably not a good idea to make eye contact because you'll intrude in that pair work. So it's worth thinking about whether you want to be part of this interaction or not, and eye contact will be a major part of that. One way in which you can avoid making eye contact is to monitor behind the learners. If they're doing some written work, this is also quite nice because it means you don't have to read upside down. Even if they're doing spoken work, it's quite an unintrusive way of monitoring. You don't become quite so obvious, so that's a useful tip. You could also just sit in the middle on a chair, not make eye contact with people, and kind of zone in, listen to different parts of the room. You'll find that you can do this if you just sit quietly and keep your eyes down. You can listen to particular parts of the room, maybe make notes on the errors that they're making for correction afterwards. If you are monitoring around the class, it's really a good idea to keep your radar going. So although you're focusing on these particular learners here, you need to kind of keep an ear open and an awareness of what's going on all the way around the class, so that you've got an idea that people are on task still. It's quite an easy mistake to make, to be so caught up with monitoring one group that everybody else is pretty much finished. So that's something else that's worth thinking about. Don't feel as if you have to monitor every single group for every single activity. A good way of avoiding only monitoring some people is to start in different places. So the one activity you do, you might start here and work round this way. Another activity you might start here and work around here. Third one you might do it this way, so that over time your attention is fairly spread through the class, but it doesn't mean that you have to monitor everyone for every activity. That's not realistic, especially in bigger classes. So I hope that this has been some help and it's given you some useful tips about starting up activities and monitoring. The next video on classroom management is going to be about giving effective feedback. So we'll see you then. Thank you very much for listening, and do get in touch if you've got any questions. Thanks very much. Bye bye.